All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time around, we're tackling a pretty meaty chapter from Zhuangzi, chapter 24 to be exact.
Yeah.
And I gotta admit, I'm a little intimidated by this one.
Oh, yeah.
It's dense, it's poetic, and honestly, it's just a lot to unpack.
Hmm.
But I think the focus, at least for me, is going to be those insights about, what real leadership looks like. That alignment with the Tao. And, I'm always fascinated by the ways that Zhuangzi warns us about, like, trying to control everything.
Yeah, the pitfalls of control, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I think, you approaching this with a bit of trepidation, that's actually the perfect mindset for Zhuangzi.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, he wants to shake things up, make us question all those assumptions that we have about how the world works, and especially how we think about leadership.
Okay, bring on the shaking then. So who is this Xu Wu Gui, and why does he choose to tell his story?
Well, Xu Wu Gui, he's this really interesting advisor, kind of enigmatic, and he shows up at the court of Marquis Wu.
Hmm.
And right away, you get this feeling that he's not your typical sage.
Yeah.
He's got this playful, almost subversive way of interacting with the Marquis. He's constantly flipping expectations and challenging him.
Mhm.
Like, for example, when the Marquis welcomes him to the court and says something like, "You must be exhausted from your journey," Zhu Wugi, he just turns it around and suggests it's actually the Marquis who is burdened,
Mm.
not by the journey itself, but by his own desires and anxieties.
That actually reminds me of a quote that I underlined when I was reading this. Zhugi says, if you indulge too much in desires and dislikes, it burdens the very essence of life. Like, that's
Yeah,
something we can all relate to, right? I
absolutely.
mean, that feeling of being weighed down by all the things we want, all the things we think we should be doing. Hmm.
Oh, for sure. I think that's what's so brilliant about Swansea. He takes these ancient philosophical ideas
Mm.
and connects them to our human experiences in a way that's like instantly relatable.
Right.
He's saying that our attachment to outcomes as need to control everything, that's often the source of our suffering.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a really core concept, Wu Wei,
Oh, yeah. Effortless action.
or non-doing. Yeah, I know it's paradoxical.
It is. It is. I feel like Wu Wei is one of those terms that I hear people throw around, but I'm not sure I totally grasp it. So I guess, does Zhu Wugi actually give us any clues about how to practice this, like how to actually live with effortless action?
Yeah, he does. He uses this really interesting analogy. He talks about dogs and horses.
Okay.
Now, it might seem a bit random at
I
first,
did a little bit, yeah.
but stick with me. He describes how dogs at different levels of, I guess you could say, awareness behave.
Hmm.
So you have these lower level dogs, right? They're just focused on basic survival needs. And then you have these middling dogs. They're a bit more in tune with their senses. But then he talks about these truly exceptional dogs, the ones who almost seem to have lost something
Or
essential.
lost something.
Yeah, and he describes them moving with this amazing grace and ease, almost as if they're not even thinking about it.
Oh, so it's like they've transcended those basic instincts and they're just tapping into a deeper level of being.
Yeah, exactly. And then he compares this to observing horses. He points out that we have all these standards of how a horse should look and move, right?
Right, right.
But the truly extraordinary horses, they kind of move beyond those forms. They're not trying to fit into any mold. They're just expressing their true nature.
Hmm. It's making me think about those moments when I'm completely absorbed in something. Like if I'm writing or I'm playing music and I completely lose track of time. Like I'm not forcing anything. It's just flowing through me. Is that what Swansea's getting at here?
I think that's a perfect example of Wu Wei. That state of effortless flow where you're not overthinking, you're not self-conscious, you're just fully present in the moment, allowing the action to just arise naturally. And Zhuangzi suggests that this principle, it applies not just to art or creative pursuits, but to leadership as well.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How does this effortless action thing play out when you're talking about leading a kingdom? I mean, a ruler can't just sit back and let things happen, right?
That's a great question. And that's where Zhu Wugi's interactions with the Marquis start to get really interesting. See, the Marquis, like any good ruler, he's concerned with the practical matters, right? He wants to know, how do I love the people? How do I stop these wars?
Mm.
But Zhu Wugi's response, well, that might surprise you.
Okay, I have a feeling it will. Lay it on me.
Zhu Wugi suggests that those very desires to love the people and stop the wars, as noble as they sound, they can actually be harmful.
Really?
Yeah, if they stem from a place of ego or a desire for control.
So So he's saying that trying to do good can backfire. I need to hear more about this.
It's all about the motivation.
Hmm.
It's the why behind the action. What Zhu Gui is getting at is that if the Marquis tries to force peace or tries to impose his idea of what's best for the people, it will most likely just create resistance and disharmony. He even uses this really, really beautiful analogy. He says, uh, perfect beauty is rarely the work of a tool.
Mm. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like forcing something to be beautiful. It usually just makes it stiff and unnatural. It loses its essence.
Exactly. And Zhuangzi, he suggests that that same principle applies to leadership. Trying to control everything, mold people and situations to fit our own ideas. That's not real leadership. True leadership, it's about understanding the natural order, the Tao, and aligning our actions with it.
So less about imposing our will and more about creating the conditions for things to flourish organically.
You got it.
Okay. But before we dive too deep into the leadership piece, I'm kind of curious about another aspect of this chapter. So Zhuangzi talks about this lady Shang,
Hmm.
and she also had this relationship with the Marquis.
Oh, right?
And it seems like she had a very different approach than Xu Wu Gui did.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering, what can her story tell us about leadership? And, maybe even challenge Xu Wu Gui's perspective a little bit.
Oh, that's a fantastic point. I'm so glad you brought her up. You see, Lady Shang, she offers this really interesting counterpoint to Xu Wu Gui. I mean, she was known for her beauty and her ability to influence the Marquis.
Mm-hmm.
But her methods were very different, much more direct, more focused on persuasion and maybe even a little bit of manipulation. Zhuangzi even tells this story about how she once tried to convince the Marquis to adopt a certain policy by, appealing to his vanity. She knew what kind of image he wanted to project.
Oh, right.
So she framed her argument in a way that would make him look good, boost his reputation.
Yeah, it sounds like she was playing the game of court politics, using her charm and wit to get what she wanted.
Exactly, exactly. And it worked, at least for a while. But Zhuangzi, he contrasts her approach with Xu Wugi's. He suggests that Lady Shang's influence, it was ultimately fleeting and superficial.
Hmm.
She was focused on manipulating the Marquis's desires, not on understanding his true nature or guiding him toward, a deeper understanding of the Tao.
So even though she was successful in achieving her goals, she wasn't really leading him in a meaningful way.
That's the key distinction that Zhuangzi is making here. True leadership, it isn't just about getting people to do what you want.
Right.
It's about helping them see the world more clearly, to align themselves with the greater good, even if it means, challenging their assumptions or pushing them outside of their comfort zone.
I see. So it's like the difference between controlling someone and empowering them.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us to another story that Zhuangzi includes in this chapter, which I think really beautifully illustrates the importance of genuine connection in leadership. It's the anecdote about the man who was exiled from the state of Yu.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I remember that one. He was so desperate for any kind of human contact after years of isolation. He was overjoyed to find someone who could at least partially understand his language, even if it wasn't his native tongue.
Yeah.
What was Zhuangzi trying to say with that?
I think he's highlighting that fundamental human need for connection, for belonging. I mean, this exile had lost everything.
Yeah.
His home, his family, his culture. But even that little sliver of shared language, of understanding, it brought him immense joy. And I think that has really profound implications for leadership.
Yeah, it makes me think about how isolated leaders can become, Surrounded by yes men and courtiers who are always telling them what they want to hear, they lose touch with the everyday people, with the reality of life outside the palace walls.
Exactly, precisely. And that isolation, it can breed arrogance, fear, and just a really distorted view of the world. Zhuangzi seems to be suggesting that true leadership, it requires this willingness to connect with people on a human level,
Right.
to listen to their stories, to understand their struggles, even if those stories are difficult or challenging to hear.
So it's not just about issuing decrees from on high. It's about creating a space where people feel seen and heard, where their voices matter, like fostering a sense of shared understanding and purpose.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Zhu Wu Gui. Even though his approach might seem uh, detached or unconventional at times, there's this deep sense of compassion and connection underlying his actions. He's not trying to control the Marquis. He's trying to guide him toward a more authentic way of being in the world.
Yeah, I'm seeing a pattern here. It's like Zhuangzi is showing us that true leadership isn't about power or dominance. It's about aligning ourselves with the Tao, with the natural order of things, and creating the conditions for others to do the same. But there's this one piece of this chapter that's still kind of nagging at me. It's the story of the Yellow Emperor getting lost and needing to ask this young horse herder for help.
Great.
Why include this story in a chapter that's ostensibly about governing?
Oh, that story, that's one of my favorites. It's so simple, yet so profound. I think Zhuangzi's using it to highlight a couple of key points. First, it's a lesson in humility.
Okay.
Here you have the Yellow Emperor, right? This legendary figure,
Yeah.
the supposed founder of Chinese civilization, and he's lost. And he has to ask this humble herder for help.
It's like a cosmic joke, right? The most powerful man in the world brought down to earth by a wrong turn.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even the wisest, the most accomplished among us, we can get lost. We can make mistakes. And we should never be too proud to ask for help. But the story also points to something even deeper, something that ties back to this idea of aligning with the Tao.
I'm listening.
So when the Yellow Emperor asks the herder for advice on governing, the boy gives this incredibly simple answer. He says, it's no different than herding horses. Just get rid of whatever harms them. There's no grand theory of governance, no complex bureaucracy, just this really basic principle of removing obstacles and allowing things to flourish naturally.
It's like he's saying, don't overthink it. Just focus on what matters.
Exactly. And I think that's such a powerful message for anyone in a position of leadership. It's a call to simplify, to get back to basics, to trust in the inherent intelligence of the system, and create the conditions for it to thrive.
But what about the people? I mean, Zhuangzi, he doesn't seem to offer much in the way of specific advice on how to care for them or ensure their well-being.
That's where I think we need to kind of look beyond the surface level of the text and consider the underlying philosophy. Remember, Zhuangzi is all about aligning with the Tao, with that natural order of things. And part of that natural order is the interconnectedness of all beings.
So it's not about imposing our will on the people. It's about creating a society
Yeah.
where everyone can flourish in accordance with their own nature.
Exactly. And that means ensuring that people have access to those basic necessities, like food, shelter, healthcare.
Right.
It means creating a system of governance that is just and equitable, where everyone has a voice and feels a sense of belonging. But it also means recognizing that true well-being, it goes beyond material comfort.
Okay.
It's about cultivating inner peace, wisdom, a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's like Zhuangzi's offering us this holistic vision of leadership, one that encompasses not just practical governance, but also the cultivation of inner virtue and creating a society that supports the flourishing of all beings. But I'm also wondering, how does this idea of aligning with the Tao, of letting go of control, play out in our everyday lives? Is this just a philosophy for emperors and sages, or can regular folks like us benefit from it too?
That's a fantastic question. And it's actually one that Zhuangzi addresses in this chapter. He introduces all these different types of people, almost like archetypes, to illustrate how clinging to desires and striving for external validation, it can lead to suffering. You know, I'm talking about the warm and beautiful people, the soaked in need people, and the rolled up people. Each of these metaphors, it paints this really vivid picture of how our desires can trap us and prevent us from experiencing true peace and freedom. But you know what? I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Maybe this is a good place to take a pause and let these ideas sink in a bit. We'll come back to these metaphorical people and explore how they relate to our own lives and that pursuit of living in alignment with the Tao when we return.
All right, so we're back, and I've been thinking about those metaphorical people.
Yeah.
You know, the ones Wangzi uses to show us, the problems with getting too attached to our desires. And I'm really curious about those warm and beautiful folks.
Oh, yeah?
They sound kind of appealing,
Right.
at first glance, but I get the feeling there's something more to them than meets the eye.
Yeah, you're right to be suspicious. Zhuangzi, he's a master of using deceptively simple language to get at these really complex ideas. And these warm and beautiful people, they represent those who get attached to a particular belief system or an ideology.
Okay.
You know, they become so enamored with it, so convinced of their own rightness, that they kind of lose sight of the bigger picture. They cling to this knowledge, thinking it makes them special or superior, but they haven't really integrated it into their being.
So it's like they're all puffed up with knowledge but haven't actually embodied it.
Exactly.
More concerned with appearing wise than actually being wise.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
And because they're so focused on this external validation. They're constantly seeking approval and affirmation, which just leaves them feeling insecure and never truly satisfied. They're trapped in this cycle of striving and grasping, always looking outside themselves for something to fill the void.
That makes me think of those people who are always name-dropping the latest self-help guru or quoting some obscure philosophical text, but you can tell that they're not actually living by those principles, you know?
Right.
It's all surface, no substance.
Yeah, totally. Zhuangzi would probably say that true wisdom, it's not something you can just acquire through books or lectures. It's something you cultivate through lived experience,
Yeah.
through self-reflection,
Yeah.
and through aligning your actions with the Tao.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the soaked in need people? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a pretty disturbing image.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
almost afraid to ask what it means.
Yeah, it's definitely one of Zhuangzi's more visceral metaphors.
Okay.
He compares these people to pig lice.
Pig lice. Wow. Okay, he doesn't hold back.
No, he doesn't. But there's a reason for this strong imagery. You see, he talks about how these lice, they burrow into the pig's hair,
Hmm?
thinking they've found this safe and comfortable haven. They're so focused on their immediate needs, on getting what they want, that they're completely blind to the bigger picture.
Right. And then, of course, the butcher comes along.
Exactly. And the pig lice, along with their cozy little world, they get roasted.
Yeah.
The point being that these soaked-in-need people, they're so consumed by their desires, so attached to their little bubble of comfort, that they're totally oblivious to the larger forces at play.
It's a powerful reminder that we're all interconnected,
Mm,
that our actions have consequences, and that clinging to that narrow view of self-interest, well, it can ultimately lead to our downfall.
exactly. And I think this metaphor, it has so much relevance for us today, especially in a world that often encourages individualism and consumerism.
Mm.
Zhuangzi, he's reminding us true security and fulfillment, they come from recognizing our interconnectedness with all things, not from trying to isolate ourselves and hoard resources.
Okay, so we've got the warm and beautiful folks who are trapped in their own kind of intellectual vanity,
Yeah.
and the soaked in need people who are blinded by those immediate desires. That leaves us with the rolled up people. Any
Yeah.
guesses as to what that metaphor might symbolize?
This one's a little more subtle, but I think it really speaks to the dangers of ambition, striving for status. Zhuangzi uses the example of Emperor Shun,
Okay.
a legendary figure known for his virtue and good governance.
So Shun's a good guy, right? What's the problem with being ambitious like him?
It's not that ambition itself is bad,
Okay.
but Zhuangzi's cautioning against getting so caught up in achieving goals and gaining recognition that we kind of lose sight of what truly matters.
Mm-hmm.
He describes Shun as being so focused on fulfilling his duties, on pleasing the people, and being seen as a good ruler, that he never really gets to enjoy the fruits of his labor.
Hmm.
He's constantly working, constantly striving, and in the end, he's just left feeling empty and unfulfilled.
So even someone who achieves great things can still end up feeling rolled up, trapped in this cycle of striving and never truly arriving.
Yeah, exactly. Zhuangzi, he's highlighted the importance of finding balance. Yes, it's good to have goals to work towards something meaningful, but we also need to make time for rest, for connection, for simply enjoying the present moment.
It's like we need to learn to savor the journey, not just fixate on the destination.
Hmm?
It's about finding that sweet spot between effort and ease,
Yeah.
between striving and acceptance.
Yeah, you've got it. And that's where this whole idea of aligning ourselves with the Tao comes in.
Mhm.
It's not about denying our desires or becoming passive. It's about understanding their nature, working with them rather than against them.
So it's more about finding a way to live in harmony with our desires rather than letting them control us.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that our desires, they're part of what makes us human,
Okay.
but they don't have to rule our lives. We can choose to align them with a greater purpose, with something that brings us true and lasting fulfillment.
This has been quite a journey. We've explored those pitfalls of clinging to desires, the importance of aligning with the Tao, that idea of effortless action, both in leadership and in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most important takeaway from this deep dive into Zhuangzi?
I think the most important takeaway is that true freedom and fulfillment, they don't come from striving for power or control or external validation. They come from cultivating that inner harmony and aligning ourselves with that natural flow of the Tao.
Beautifully put. And listener, if you're feeling inspired to explore more of Zhuangzi's wisdom, we've included some recommended readings in the show notes. And remember, The journey of self-discovery and alignment with the Tao, it's a lifelong practice.
Hmm.
There's no destination to arrive at, no finish line to cross. It's about embracing the journey, learning from our experiences, and continually refining our understanding of what it means to live in harmony with ourselves, with each other, and with the universe as a whole. Until next time, happy deep diving.